Hello, I'm Brian Fox. Welcome to I Hate Rock Music, and going to do another video today, and it's on the band Andromeda. And of course, a lot of collectors know about Andromeda. Their one album from 1969 on RCA is extremely collectible and has been for a long time, and it really deserves all the attention and acclaim it gets. Fortunately, we have a number of CD reissues that there's a Return to Sanity 2 CD set, but there's also another one that's 3 CDs that collects a lot of extra material, including some live material and work by other bands associated with Andromeda. Because the band is John DuCann, who of course is famous from Atomic Rooster and Hard Stuff, and he was active all through the '60s. He was kind of a child prodigy on the guitar, like Jimmy Page, for example. And in 1968, he was involved with a band called 5 Day a Week Straw People, which pretty much was more of a psychedelic record and is firmly rooted in 1968. But then they moved on as a quartet and then a trio as the band The Attack. And so some of these Andromeda reissues, there's material by The Attack, and particularly there's a great album out there called Final Days by The Attack, and it shows a direct correlation between The Attack and Andromeda. In fact, they share a lot of material. So the Attack are a great example of John DuCann in the '60s, kind of formulating his hard rock approach, because a lot of the early Attack material is definitely a little more rooted in mod and psychedelia of the '60s, but the Attack was kind of a bridge. So then we get to Andromeda, who existed from 1968 to 1969, and John DuCann on guitar and vocals, Mick Hawksworth on bass, and Jack McCulloch on drums, later to include Ian McLean on drums. And they put out that one album on RCA in 1969. So not a lot of great bands come to mind that signed to RCA in the UK, but definitely a major label, and so Andromeda were definitely high profile. And in 1969, they were featured in a lot of John Peel shows, so got a lot of attention there. And then they toured with Black Sabbath, and so to be touring with Black Sabbath in 1969 was a good opening gig, and Black Sabbath fans certainly would appreciate Andromeda. And there was talk at one point of Pete Townsend being interested in producing them, but it never happened. But they definitely had enough of a reputation that somebody like Pete Townsend would be interested in producing them. And in fact, there may be some Andromeda material out there produced by Pete Townsend. There seems to be a lot of missing information on whether that actually happened. But Mick Hawksworth, of course, went on to pretty notable British rock bands, Killing Floor and Fuzzy Duck. And we don't really know what happened to the drummers. And John DuCann, of course, as I mentioned, moved on to Atomic Rooster and Hard Stuff. But the Andromeda album is a pretty great record as far as proto metal and being one of the pioneers of proto metal or metal. Andromeda is really up there with Gun and Black Sabbath on the really truly heavy albums. They numbers on this album, they really are pretty heavy, and a lot of interesting long arrangements, a lot of opportunities to show off a lot of great complex arrangements, and just the firepower of the band, including the killer drummer. And John DuCann's guitar work over all of it is exceptional. And I love his kind of staccato, brittle kind of sound. And there's just something about his style that really kind of stands out and is very singular. Um, and we see that a lot with his work with Hard Stuff and Atomic Rooster as well. It's got a really amphetamine-laced sort of lead style, and you find all those elements on the Andromeda album. And I talk a lot about bands from '68 and '69 that kind of have one foot in the '60s and one foot in the '70s. And Andromeda is a good example of that. There's a couple of, I guess you'd call them ballads or slower, or quieter tunes on the Andromeda album that show that they still kind of had a little bit of schizophrenia, and definitely relate more to the 60s. But when you get to the heavy stuff, which dominates the record, it definitely sounds like they're moving into the 70s, and it doesn't really sound very dated. And as I mentioned before, it really stands up pretty well with the giant pioneers of early metal in the UK, including Gun and Black Sabbath and so many others. But I can recommend this album with no reservations whatsoever. As far as an early heavy rock record, it really has everything going for it, and I highly recommend it. And most of John DuCann's work is always worth hearing. He's a really interesting, very identifiable, and really crazy guitar player. I mean, there's kind of a psychosis in his guitar playing that I really appreciate, whether it's his massive slab of chords or um, his twisted leads. They're very unique sounding to my ears. But I highly recommend Andromeda. As usual, I'll post it below and check it out if you haven't heard it, and you like Black Sabbath and Gun and hard stuff particularly, and Atomic Rooster, then you really owe it to yourself to hear Andromeda. Definitely one of the best underground albums of 1969 for my money, and really delivers everything you want from that kind of genre in that year. I'm Brian Fox. Thanks for watching I Hate Rock Music.